the Belgic Confession each week during the teaching service. So last week we started with Genesis 12, verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. Well, Egypt has the largest river in the world, that's the Nile, and it rarely goes dry. So there's almost always food in Egypt, even if it's expensive. With a group of at least 1,000 people in his caravan, that's just too many people for Abram to feed in Judea during a famine. There's just not enough. And Abram doesn't own any of the land. He's just a nomad. So that means he has to buy his food from other people, most of it. I mean, you can catch wild game, you can kill animals and eat them, but to get any vegetables or grains, you have to buy it. Egypt, although it was run by the children of Ham, was pretty orderly. Now, they were crazy with all kinds of gods. You know, they practically worshiped cats and alligators and etc. But they didn't spend too much time attacking other nations at this point. It would be much later when Egypt became more expansionistic. So for now, though, the Egyptians just enjoy the farming life and being safe. So then Genesis 12, 11 through 13. And it came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, "Indeed, I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore it will happen, when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife,' and they will kill me, but they will let you live. So please say that you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you." So Abram is afraid of being murdered by the Egyptians. He asks his wife to lie. Now, if Abram is 75, which is what we know from the text, and his wife is 65, how could she be so beautiful? So we talked about some reasons for that. One reason is that Abram and other people like him would lived almost 200 years. And so at age 65, Sarai is just early middle age, half her potential age less. And since the average lifespan of an American woman is about 90, in comparison, Sarah at 65 is about 33 in our years. And so you can still be very pretty at age 33. Also, it's possible that the Pharaoh is more than 150 years old. So to somebody who's 150, somebody who's 65 is a young spring chicken. So it is possible for Sarai to have been beautiful as she aged. But lying seems to have been a family trait among the family of Terah. His grandchildren, Laban and Rebekah, were master liars and manipulators. And Sarah lies too. When Jesus hears her laugh when he promises her a son, she says, "I didn't laugh." And he says, "Oh, yes, you did. I heard you laugh." So even Sarah is a liar at times. Truth is a problem for all humans because all humans are born children of Satan. And Satan was a liar and a murderer from the beginning. Well, lies come naturally to us. Next, we considered the theory that Abram was not yet a believer. Some preachers and commentators claim that Abram didn't become a believer until Genesis 15:6. That's because the verse says, "He believed in the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness." Now, I showed you two passages from Paul. They were in Galatians 3 and in Romans 4. And they both say Abram was not converted until he had faith. So what these people are saying is, since Genesis 15:6 is the first time we hear about faith, this must be when he first had faith. But that's not the case. It would mean, for one thing, that everything Abram did in chapters 12 through 14 was still evil. And I don't believe that's true. And also, linguistically, Genesis 15:6 is not a simple past verb. It does not really say Abram believed sometime in the past or right now. It means that he has been believing. It's a pluperfect. So in other words, he's got faith now and he believes, and God counts it to him for righteousness now, but it's the same as the faith he had before, which means the faith from chapters 12 through 14. There are a couple of other reasons to believe that. In Genesis 14, when Abram and his men save Lot from the enemy armies, the priest named Melchizedek comes out and blesses him and calls him, "Blessed be Abraham from God Most High." Well, it's kind of hard for Melchizedek to say he's from God Most High if he's not even a believer yet. So I reject that common interpretation. But the final proof is Hebrews 11:8. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out from the place where he would receive an inheritance. So in other words, he had faith in Genesis chapter 12, and that just seals the question there. So that means, though, that Abram, the liar in Egypt, was a saved person when he did it. And that should not be a big surprise. How many of you have lied since you became a Christian? I would guess all of you and me. We've all lied. It's a rhetorical question. But consider this lie, Genesis 12, 14 through 16. I mean, this isn't your average run-of-the-mill little lie. Oh, yes, dear, that dress looks great on you. It's not one of those kind of lies. So it was when Abram came to Egypt. The Egyptians saw the woman that she was very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh saw her and commended her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. So Abram's lie has helped the Pharaoh to steal his own wife. And they gave Abram lots of goodies for her, sheep and oxen and donkeys and camels and servants. So suddenly he's become really more rich than he ever was before, but he's lost his wife. And that's a big problem because God promised that his wife and he would become a great nation, and now he doesn't have a wife. How do you become a great nation without a wife? Not going to happen. So in an amazing story of irony, it's Abram who is the sinner in this passage, and it's the Pharaoh who is the virtuous one in this passage. He is now forced by God to choose, and Pharaoh chooses wisely. We see in verses 17 through 20, but the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you've done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now, therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go away." So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. So the Pharaoh runs him out of town, out of the country. This also shows, though, yeah?
Did he get to keep all the animals?
Yes, he got to keep everything. I'm kind of surprised that the Pharaoh let him keep everything, but he did.
I thought that's what that meant.
Yep. So this shows how little faith Abram had in some ways. It's interesting. When God told Abram what to do, he did it. But when God didn't tell Abram what to do, he started relying on his own scheming self and his own lies. That was his custom default position. And that's probably true of us too. When we know what God wants us to do, hopefully we do it. But when we don't know what God wants us to do you just go back to your old ways and do whatever you would have done before? That's not a good idea. The worst thing about this is that it does not cure Abram of his lying problem. He will pull the same trick again in 25 years with another local king, Abimelech. And even worse than that, the lying problem of Abram and Sarai comes to infect their whole household and all their descendants. Isaac becomes a liar. Jacob becomes a liar. All of Jacob's sons become liars. This is what you call a generational sin, where the sin passes from the father to the children. Sin is contagious, and it's a great danger in families because the sins of the father often show themselves in things like alcoholism, drug use, physical abuse, and those sorts of things. So Abram was definitely not a perfect godly man, and neither are we. So that's the review from Genesis chapter 12. Today we begin chapter 13. Genesis 13 verses, I'll read verses 1 through 5. Then Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him to the south. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. So Abram, he had a real scare down there in Egypt. He was afraid he'd get murdered, and he almost did. If God had not been punishing the Pharaoh already, I suspect the Pharaoh would have killed him for lying. It was certainly within his rights. But now he's afraid of God, the Pharaoh is, because of the plagues, and just wants rid of him. So getting caught in the lie almost got him killed, which is funny in a way. But God protected him, and now he's rich in animals and servants. And now he can survive the Judean famine because he's got so much money and meat. All those cattle that were given to him, they can live on those for a while. And he's got so much money, he can certainly buy any expensive food in the region. So Abram returns to the place where he had first arrived in Judea and called on God and got a response. In other words, it sounds like Abram wants to talk to God again. He goes back to the same place where God talked to him before. And this is a giant hill where Abram can see all the land around. He can see west into Canaan. He can see east into the Jordan Valley and the plains with Sodom and Gomorrah. It does not say whether God spoke to Abram there or not, but it does seem that Abram got a lot of wisdom and faith back, because in the next several verses, he has a new temptation and a trial to ponder with his nephew Lot. So look now at verses 5 through 7, Genesis 13, 5 through 7. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. Now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. I want to take verse 7 first, because it may have more significance than you think. I mean, why stick that in there? The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. What's that got to do with anything with Abram and Lot's herds being too big? Lot and Abram have their herdsmen fighting in verses 5 and 6, and then again in verses 8 and 9. So why throw in this little sentence? Because it actually is related. Many scholars have come to believe that the Perizzites are not actually a tribe, but a slang phrase to mean rural people. Now, there's a number of reasons for this. What this would mean then, if that's true, is that the Canaanites are the wicked guys who live in the cities and towns. The Perizzites are the wicked guys who are nomadic and wander the hills with their livestock. They're kind of like the guys who feed the cities. So they don't live in the cities, they live outside the cities. But they've got flocks and herds to feed the guys in the city. So that's the food supply of the city. That means that not only do Abram and Lot have to fight over resources between themselves, they're also competing with all the city's herders. So the Perizzites are thought to be the herders for the cities of Canaan. And one reason we think that is because this tribe, Perizzites, is never mentioned in the table of nations in Genesis 10. And every time it's used in the rest of the Bible, all the way up to the book of Ezra, it sounds like they were just nomadic wanderers. So they weren't exactly a tribe. You might just say they were the herdsmen of the region. And so this makes it even harder for Abram and Lot. That's why they're mentioned here. Not only do Abram and Lot have big herds, the cities have herds too. So there's a three-way competition going on. And if you think about this, it's not much different from if you had two families living in one house. If you've got two families living in one house, after a while, you might start getting too full. It feels a little crowded, and you're always bumping into each other, and they're using the kitchen when you want to use the kitchen, and etc. It's the same sort of thing going on, only on a much bigger scale, because when you think of the caravan with 1,000 people, let's say 700 of them are Abrams and 300 of them are Lots. That's a lot of people to be around all the time. Now, they cannot attack the Perizzites, because if they attack the herdsmen of the cities could get angry and attack them. Because, it's an act of war to attack the food supply of the local guys. So they have to let the Perizzites graze, and then Abram and Lot gets what's left. And Abram and Lot don't have enough with what's left during the famine to eat. So the best solution is to split up. Even though Lot and his group has been hanging around with Abram for 10 years, now they have to separate. The question is how? So now look at verses 8 and 9. Genesis 13, 8 and 9. So Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, I will go to the left." So this is Abram's proposal. And this scenario shows that Abram has found his faith again, because he's showing a lot of wisdom and deference to God. In Egypt, Abram schemed and planned, and his scheming messed up everything. Now Abram seems to realize that it's God who makes Abraham blessed or not blessed. And so he doesn't have to try to keep his own life together. He's no longer feeling he has to always be in control. He went to Egypt thinking he needs to be in control. He wasn't in control. Now he's saying, okay, I guess I don't need to be in control. God can bless me anyway. So Abram is free to leave this choice, not in the hand of Lot alone, but in the hand of God. If Lot chooses one way, then apparently God wanted Lot to choose that way and me to take the other way. So in a manner of speaking, in puns, Abram is casting lot, or lots, and God decides how it falls. What is the purpose of this separation? Why did they leave? It's not so Abram can get richer or have more food for his animals. Abram is rightly concerned with the central issue of strife. He said, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, for we are brethren." Now, the truth is, Abram was the boss. He's the older man, and Lot is just a nephew who's being treated like a brother. Lot is only rich because he tagged along with Abram and thereby got blessed by God. Also, it seems quite obvious that Abram owns the army that is protecting Abram and Lot. He owns the 318 armed men. We have no references of Lot ever having any, although he might have a few. So if Abram chose, he could pick the best land for himself and tell Lot, "You get what's left." What we see here, though, is that Abram chooses peace by humility rather than strife by taking his rights, by authority. Now, I guess I'm kind of fortunate Rebecca's not here. You know that I'm new to family life. And I'm not trying to make any negative allusions to my wife or family in saying this. But I have often heard Christians and relatives and church members say at one time or another that the husband should just put his foot down and make decisions even if his wife objects to it. He's in charge. He should decide what happens. That's because the husband is the ruler and the authority chosen by God, and he should just do his job and stop dilly-dallying because his wife doesn't like it. Now, this is the kind of advice that is half true and half lie. It is true that the husband has responsibility to make final decisions even if there is disagreement. However, it is also true that making some decisions against the objections of wife or family can bring strife, and bringing strife is never a good thing. It is not loving to always insist on your own way. If decisions cause strife between husband and wife, there are a couple of possibilities. 1, the husband is wrong. 2, the wife is wrong. Or 3, they're both wrong. In fact, I suspect that a lot of times, just the fact that strife comes in your decision may mean that a bad decision was made, or at least the decision is partly bad because it resulted in strife. So I'm just proposing that when strife is threatening in a family relationship, it may be wisdom and not cowardice to defer authority in the pursuit of peace. Now, Abram did not insist on his own authority. He allowed his relative to make a choice. Now, I might suggest that because Lot was his own family leader, allowing Lot to make a bad choice was permissible. I don't think I would allow my wife to make such a bad choice, especially if I know this bad choice is going to lead to her death or our family problems, which is going to be moving into Sodom and Gomorrah. But in many cases, strife is worth avoiding whenever possible. So it's not right to criticize every husband for allowing his wife to make some of her own decisions. So that's my point. Some decisions aren't big enough to require the husband to approve it. I mean, does she want to buy that kind of cereal or my kind of cereal? It doesn't matter. It's only the big things that matter. So just to show you, though, that this isn't just my opinion, let's look at some Bible verses about strife. They're all 3 of them are from the book of Proverbs. So if you turn over to Proverbs, we'll look at 3 of them. Starting in Proverbs 13, verse 10. Proverbs 13:10. By pride comes nothing but strife, but with the well-advised is wisdom. So the difference there is between pride and good thinking, being well-advised. Now turn over to Proverbs 17. The next 2 will both be in Proverbs 17. Proverbs 17:1. Better is a dry morsel with quietness than a house full of feasting with strife. Sounds like sometimes that sounds like a Thanksgiving meal there, doesn't it? Now jump down to verse 14, Proverbs 17:14. The beginning of strife is like releasing water. Therefore, stop contention before a quarrel starts. In other words, and this is certainly true, if you can stop the problem from happening, you'll be much better off, because once it gets rolling, it can get worse and worse. Now, there's many similar verses in the New Testament, but I'm just going to cite one of them. Turn over to Philippians chapter 2. We're going to look at Philippians 2, verses 1 through 4. Philippians 2, 1 through 4. Therefore, if there is any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, But in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. And if you remember, the next few verses of Philippians tell of Jesus Christ, who became humble to help all of us. So, in other words, considering the needs of others enables us to be humble and not grasp at being in control and getting more than other people. That's what Abram did there in Genesis chapter 13. He let go of his own rights and he allowed Lot to make his own choice. Now, in this case, the strife had already begun, and Abram is trying to diffuse it. I spoke about strife a few weeks ago in the worship service regarding specifically family strife in the context of faith in families who have unbelievers in them. And sadly, there's really nothing you can do about that. You can't stop the strife between believers and unbelievers. It's a natural strife. It's similar to cats and dogs. They just usually don't like each other. But, so the only thing you can do when non-Christian family members attack you is to pray for them and continue to show them love. You cannot stop that kind of strife. In this case, though, in Genesis, both Lot and Abram are believers, and it's possible to make peace. The issue here is not their faith. It's simply geography and logistics. They both need space in order to flourish. Abram shows himself to be a peacemaker. It's like Jesus said in the Beatitudes, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God." The hardest part about being a peacemaker is being humble, not insisting always on your own rights. And one reason why that's so rare today, one reason that our society is inching toward anarchy and even possibly civil war, is because the victim mentality requires its practitioners to always be angry and always offended at every perceived slight or harm. In other words, everyone is being told and taught to demand your own rights, even if those rights were never written down or promised to them. And all of that is pride. It is based in pride. The kingdom of Satan is full of pride. That's the defining sin of Lucifer himself. So his children, the wicked, are also proud. That's the reason why we cannot reach compromise or consensus in our current government, because one or both sides are too proud to meet in the middle. We cannot cede one single inch to the other side, or else we're weak and missing the ideal. The problem is that there is no such thing as good enough. No one can accept less than full recognition for their rights because they're too stupid to see that getting some progress is better than demanding your full rights and getting none. In other words, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Humility enables you to accept a partial good. In the case of Abram, the full good would be to tell Lot to take the barren hills while he takes the green pastures. That would not achieve any peace. That would create more strife and anger. What does achieve peace is when Abram allows Lot to choose his own pasture. That brings peace. The numerous flocks will separate and there will be no more fighting between the shepherds. That is pursuing peacemaking. Do you ever give up some of your own rights to make peace? Or do you always insist on your own rights? Are you too proud to lose? Do you see it as losing when you let someone else win an argument or a decision? In politics, that may be true. If you constantly subordinate your own rights to other people, they can take advantage of it. And this is in fact a problem in dysfunctional families, where perhaps a wife allows her husband to abuse her. That is not peacemaking. That is allowing harm and evil to happen. So some rights cannot be sacrificed, but a lot could be. And a lot of your rights could be given up to show humility and peacefulness. And in point of fact, nephew Lot immediately takes complete advantage of this choice from Abram. He shows himself to be selfish in the extreme. Look at verses 10 through 13. Genesis 13, verses 10 through 13. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of God, like the land of Egypt as you go toward Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent as far as Sodom. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. So Lot was captured by the lust of the eyes. All he had to do was look and see, oh, that's the place I want to go. South of where they were was the desert. North is the scrubby, crowded mountains. West are the dangerous cities of the Canaanites. And east is the beautiful Jordan River Valley ruled by Sodom and Gomorrah. And so as a shepherd, thinking just as a businessman, I own sheep. I want green grass for my sheep. I'm going east. Now also, not only is it lush, those 5 cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah and their allies there, are walled, heavily defended cities. And so now Lot can escape, so to speak, from Abram's protection. He no longer needs his uncle to protect him. Now he can live with the protection of those people, and now he can be his own man. So Lot immediately took his family down to live in the wickedest place on earth for the sake of money and security. In other words, Lot does not share in Abram's faith fully. Abram is learning to wander and trust God for his security and his blessings. In the face of many obstacles, that is a dangerous feeling. You realize being a nomad means you're always open to attack. There are no walls. You've got guards maybe stationed around, but you have no way of knowing when the enemy arrives until they're on you. And there's nowhere to hide. You're out in the desert or on the mountains. So how much safer would it feel to live in a walled city? Maybe Lot was a city boy at heart, and certainly his wife agreed. It sounds like they first moved a little bit toward Sodom in their tents, but gradually they got closer and closer until they finally gave up their tents altogether and started living in the city, which we'll see in a few more chapters. Now, there is nothing sinful per se about living in a city. In fact, the earth will hold the New Jerusalem. It will be the biggest city in human history after the Judgment Day. But the problem with cities is exactly the same problem with country folks. It's the humans who are living in it. It's not the city itself, it's who lives there. What makes cities more dangerous is that humans are mammals, and we're not that different from herd animals in many ways. Most people are followers, and we are heavily influenced by the people around us. It's like having friends. Good friends can make you more virtuous, or at least less wicked, and bad friends can easily make you more wicked. In order to fit in, you sacrifice your own principles so you can be accepted. And so, when you live in a city among lots of people, you tend to modify your own thoughts and feelings to match theirs. And thus, cities have largely become stupid and violent because stupidity and violence spread like disease. Sodom and Gomorrah were already known to be completely perverted. And yet Lot is willing to move there because he'll make more money and feel safer. You get richer in a city than you can out in the country. And the consequences of that stupid decision are going to come to haunt him, not just once, but repeatedly over the next decade. And it will eventually cost his family much of its life. His family will be briefly captured and enslaved by foreign enemies. We'll see that next week. And then all of his stuff will be destroyed in a firestorm, and his wife is going to die. And his girls, his daughters, will lose their husbands. All of this because Lot decided to live in a wicked city. Now, this is certainly an excellent example of taking your time and making decisions. That bad decision Lot made, he made in an instant. He just looked and saw it and thought, ooh, great. He didn't take any time at all considering that. A bad decision in an important area of your life can be very toxic. There are consequences that naturally flow from bad decisions. Even though Hebrews calls Lot righteous, that means he was forgiven and at least somewhat virtuous. But most of what we see in the Bible about Abram's nephew is that his life was wrecked by one bad decision that he never corrected. He had 2 or 3 chances to correct it, and he never did. After being captured by foreigners and saved by Abram, why does he go back to Sodom? He didn't learn his lesson. Maybe his wife and daughters talked him into staying. In that case, he should have stood up for what was right and hightailed it out of that urban cesspool. And right now, we're faced with a similar choice here in the state of California. It is not yet wholly evil and perverse. Mostly Californication is limited to big cities and its officials. But we have to keep in mind also that if the perversion and danger becomes too widespread and begins to pose a threat to our families, we may have to move out. For now, though, we are capable of being salt and light. We're part of the kingdom of truth that hopefully will leaven the loaf, as Jesus says. Now, how do we know when that time will arrive? Well, in the case of Sodom, it appears to have been when less than 10 people in a city could be called righteous. And certainly we're not there yet. You cannot be salt and light in a place where they only love darkness. You just get killed. You become a cancer that the inhabitants will want to remove by violence. So that's how you'll know when it's time to go, when it becomes dangerous to stay. So next week, we will finish with Genesis chapter 13. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, then we'll end Sunday. Well, we'll end the teaching service, and then we'll go into our congregational meeting. End the stream.